Some people think money, power, or an HOA's protection can shield them from consequences. That's exactly what one spoiled teenager believed. When she took something that didn't belong to her, my ATV, her mother, the HOA's queen bee, declared her daughter untouchable and dared me to do something about it. But what they didn't expect was how quickly their arrogance would spiral out of control. Because when the truth came out, the very people who thought they ruled this neighborhood ended up facing the one thing they never thought possible: handcuffs, humiliation, and a courtroom with no escape. I never thought moving into a gated community would come with this much drama. After years of saving, I finally bought a modest but well-kept home in a neighborhood that promised quiet streets, manicured lawns, and the kind of safety where you could leave your garage door open without a second thought. At least that was the dream. The reality was far different, because woven into this peaceful-looking place was an HOA board that acted less like caretakers and more like royalty. At the top of that hierarchy stood Karen, her real name not important, because her reputation said it all. Karen had a daughter who was the embodiment of entitlement. She strutted around like the neighborhood was her personal playground, revving her little scooter through people's yards, blasting music at odd hours, and treating anyone who questioned her as if they were beneath her. And why wouldn't she? With her mother holding the gavel in every HOA meeting, there wasn't a single rule she couldn't bend or break. Neighbors whispered about fines being waived, noise complaints being buried, and parking violations disappearing. If anyone else had done half the things this teenager did, they'd be hit with threats of liens or court summons. For me, though, the tension started the day I brought home my ATV. It wasn't some luxury toy, it was practical. The terrain just outside the neighborhood had trails perfect for weekend rides, and it doubled as a utility vehicle for yard work. I took pride in keeping it polished and secure, storing it in the corner of my driveway under a heavy-duty lock and chain. What I didn't realize was that it had caught the eye of someone who believed everything in sight was hers for the taking. It began with little hints. Karen's daughter walking past my house more often than usual, circling the ATV like a hawk sizing up prey. Sometimes she'd tap at her phone, snapping pictures, whispering to her friends, laughing. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just harmless curiosity. But soon a nagging feeling settled in my gut. In a neighborhood where the rules were supposed to protect property, I found myself questioning if they applied to me at all. After all, rules here weren't written in ink. They were written in Karen's favor. The HOA under her thumb thrived on pettiness. A neighbor was once fined for leaving their trash can out an hour past pickup. Another got a threatening letter for planting flowers that didn't align with the community's color. A scheme. Yet, while others paid dearly for small mistakes, Karen and her daughter floated above it all. The power imbalance was suffocating, and I could sense that sooner or later, I'd be dragged into the web. And I was right. Because the line between curiosity and theft was about to vanish, and my ATV would become the spark that lit an entire storm of neighborhood chaos. The first real sign of trouble came on a quiet Saturday morning. I had just finished mowing my lawn when I noticed the heavy lock on my ATV was slightly shifted. At first I thought maybe I had clipped it while walking past, but when I bent down to check, I saw faint scratches near the chain, like someone had been fiddling with it. My stomach tightened. It wasn't proof of anything, but it planted a seed of suspicion that refused to leave my mind. Over the next week, I kept my eyes sharper, and that's when the pattern became undeniable. Karen's daughter, let's call her Madison, had developed a routine. She'd wander down my street with her group of friends, laughing too loud, tossing soda cans on the curb, always pausing near my driveway. Sometimes she'd tug at the lock when she thought no one was watching. Once I even caught her sitting on the ATV, striking poses for selfies while her friends snapped pictures. I confronted her gently at first, telling her not to touch my property. She rolled her eyes, muttered something under her breath, and sauntered off. Minutes later, Karen herself was at my door, tapping her nails against the frame like a judge ready to hand out a verdict. "She's just a kid," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Maybe next time ask before accusing." Accusing? I'd simply asked her daughter not to climb onto something that wasn't hers. But in Karen's world, Perception was reality, and she controlled both. I knew then that any complaint I made would be brushed aside. Still, I reinforced the chains and added a small GPS tracker inside the ATV, just in case. That precaution would soon prove essential, because a week later, the ATV was gone. I stepped outside one morning and froze. The space in my driveway that had always been filled by the sturdy machine was empty. Nothing but the dragged remnants of a chain scraping across the pavement. My heart raced as I followed the trail, leading out of the neighborhood and into the open road. Panic mixed with fury, but I forced myself to breathe. I had the tracker. I had proof. The GPS signal led me straight to the other side of the community, where, unsurprisingly, it blinked from the garage of Karen's house. My blood boiled. She hadn't even bothered to hide it. There it sat, my ATV, stripped of its lock, the key slot scratched open, the seat smeared with muddy shoes. I snapped photos, documented everything, and marched up to the door. But before I could even knock, it swung open. Madison stood there with her arms crossed, smirking like she had won. "It's mine now," she said flatly. "Mom said I can use it whenever I want." I was speechless for a moment, stunned by the audacity. But then Karen appeared, arms folded, lips curled in that same smug expression. "You should be careful throwing around words like stolen," she said smoothly. "This is a private community. We handle things internally. If you want to take this further, well, I'd hate for you to rack up HOA violations in the meantime." It was a threat, plain and simple. She was daring me to push back, banking on fear of retaliation to keep me silent, and she might have been right. Others had been cowed before me. But I wasn't about to let her win. Instead of shouting, I walked away. I let her think she'd scared me off. What she didn't know was that I had every shred of evidence. I needed the tracker logs, the photos, the damaged lock, and even her smug admission. But Karen wasn't done. In the days that followed, she doubled down. A notice appeared in my mailbox, citing me for improper storage of recreational vehicles. Second letter warned me about lawn violations that didn't exist. And then came a fine $600 for leaving unsightly equipment in plain view, referring to the empty space where my ATV used to be. It was laughable, but it was also strategic. She was trying to bury me in stress until I dropped the matter. What she didn't realize was that every petty move only added fuel to the fire. Neighbors began to whisper. Some avoided eye contact, afraid of being pulled into the drama. But others quietly encouraged me. They'd seen Karen's abuse of power for years. They'd watched her daughter trample over the rules with impunity. And now for the first time, someone wasn't backing down. So I took the next step. I filed a police report. The officer who came to my house was cautious at first, asking if I was sure if I had proof. When I showed him the tracker data, the photos and the damaged chain, his eyebrows lifted. "That's pretty solid," he admitted. And when I explained who the suspected thief was, I could see recognition in his eyes. This wasn't the first time her name had come up. Still, procedure had to be followed. He said he'd need to visit Karen's home to confirm. My pulse quickened at the thought. I almost felt guilty, for her daughter, because I knew what was coming. But then I remembered the smugness, the arrogance, the way they believed they were untouchable, and just like that, the guilt evaporated. The walls of Karen's kingdom were starting to crack. The day of reckoning came faster than I expected. Just 2 days after I filed the police report, I saw a patrol car roll slowly through the neighborhood. It wasn't unusual to see security trucks here, but an official police cruiser? That was a rare sight. My heart pounded as I watched it stop in front of Karen's massive 2-story house, the engine humming like a countdown to justice. Word spread instantly. Neighbors peeked through blinds, stepped out onto porches, and whispered to one another. After years of enduring Karen's smug dominance, this was the show everyone had been waiting for. Even I stayed back a little, standing at the edge of my driveway, watching events unfold like a spectator, in a theater where the villain was about to get their comeuppance. The officers approached her door and knocked firmly. Within seconds, Madison appeared, her usual smirk plastered on her face. She had no idea what was coming. When the officer asked to speak with her mother, she laughed and leaned against the doorframe. "You can't just walk in here," she said confidently. "This is private property. My mom runs this place." But her bravado faltered when Karen appeared behind her. She had that same icy smile, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. The officers wasted no time explaining why they were there. They mentioned the stolen ATV, the tracker data, the photos, and the report filed against Madison. Karen tried to interrupt, waving her hands, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, and that community disputes don't require police involvement. That's when the lead officer's tone sharpened. "Ma'am, theft is a criminal matter. If the vehicle is here, we need to verify it now." Karen's mask cracked. She tried to stall, arguing about property rights and HOA authority, but the officers were unmoved. One of them asked her to step aside. When she refused, they reminded her that obstructing an investigation was a separate charge. That silenced her, though her glare could have burned holes through steel. And then the garage door opened. There it was, my ATV parked in plain view, mud streaks still on the tires, the lock completely destroyed. The sight hit me like a surge of vindication. Neighbors gasped audibly. Phones were out, recording every second. The very thing Karen wanted to keep in-house had now become the most public spectacle this community had ever seen. The officers inspected the ATV, noting the tracker hidden under the seat. They compared it to my paperwork, the VIN number, and the photos I had provided. Every piece matched perfectly. It was undeniable. My property had been stolen, and the thief was standing right in front of them. That's when Madison finally cracked. She stomped her foot, crossed her arms, and shouted, "It's not fair!" He wasn't even using it. I needed it more than he did. The entitlement dripped from her words like poison. Her mother tried to hush her, but it was too late. Every neighbor within earshot now had confirmation of what they already suspected. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was theft, plain and simple.